Severance Season 2, Episode 1, titled Hello, Miss Cobell. So, Luke, Paul, welcome to the Core Podcast. Luke obviously joined me for the Season 2 preview. Paul and Luke are now going to be my host for the rest of this season. And Luke, we did a very surface level preview. We had a blast doing it. We still ended up going over an hour, but we promised we were going to get into these theories. We were going to be SMEs, and I am ready to go to talk theories. But first, Paul, Luke, whichever one wants to go first, I want to know what you thought after 3 years. How do you feel about finally having an episode of Severance to watch?
Go ahead, Paul, because you weren't on the preview. We'll let you throw some thoughts out there. And you can even just say thoughts in general of season one, because I know you watched that for the first time recently. So you're a little bit more
Yes.
fresh into the Severance world.
I am a spoiled child because I finished watching season one literally, I think, 4 days before season two dropped. So I didn't have to wait 3 years. So I got very lucky. Everything from season one is super fresh in my head. So there's a lot of little details that you think are going to get wrapped up or at least touched on, explained maybe a little bit at the end of season one. But there's so much happened that they just kind of skip on over it. So there's a lot to be found in season two, a lot to hopefully they can touch on. Whether I know you guys talked on it a lot on the preview episode, the goats number one thing in like everybody's mind. What the hell is that going on? A lot of different small things like the black ooze. We can talk theories on that a little bit too with Irv and everything going on. But it is so satisfying to see this crew back together. Like I said, I didn't even have to wait. But when they started up season two with this new squad, this new team, I'm like, this is going to stink. This is going to stink. And I know the previews kind of showed the whole squad come back together, so that wasn't like too much of a mystery. Another reason why previews stink, man. I if I didn't see the preview, I would have thought that we were going to get this new crew for at least a little bit. But everything is done so well. Really excited, really excited to talk theories too. So.
Yeah, the cinematography, it's right there. It feels like we haven't skipped a beat. It looks like the quality of like the acting and writing has not been hurt by the writer strike that happened a year and a half ago. I know there was a rumor that the people were scared of that, but I think that was all, shut down once the early reviews came in, basically giving glowing season 2 Severance remarks like all around. And this was just for sure just a setting the stage for the Innies plot line for all of season 2. We mentioned it, Jimmy, on the podcast. I was guessing that there was going to be a time skip, and it looks like there was like about a 5-month in the outside world time skip, which the implications of that is going to be crazy. And I'm sure we're going to have episodes where we're going back and we're kind of filling in the gaps, seeing how Milchek even convinced Mark to come back, if that's how it went. That's going to be really fun when we start breaking down what fills in the season 1, season 2 bridge there. But in terms of just like what we got here, I've been waiting for this for so long that it was amazing. Like the marketing they were doing in New York was getting me hype, and it all kind of came together once the elevators started ringing for all the homies to come back into the severed floor. It was great. Like, I'm pretty surprised we got no Miss Cobell, especially after the name of this episode. And I'm also pretty surprised we didn't get any Miss Casey besides that last flash, which we'll talk about, of like the closing shot. But this was good, because if you're not going to give us anything to do with the Audis, like, this is how I want us to go about it. Like, you're setting the scene, you're giving the information share scene, so we don't have to cover what they all saw. Like, we got to see that all organically, and it felt good. And now we're back to being on the same page, with the exception of potentially Helly, but that's going to be a very fun conversation in itself. But overall, great episode. I might have 1 or 2 complaints, but it's all very minor. This was prestige TV back at its finest, and I'm ready to go through this. So pass it back to you, Jimmy. What did you think? Were you impressed with the opener?
Yeah, I was very impressed, but I need to just say, Paul, I had no idea that you hadn't seen it. I thought you were doing a rewatch. So that is crazy. That's up there with Brian not seeing Dark yet. I know a lot of these things we wait
and
on
Paul
purpose.
Paul hasn't seen Dark.
Oh my gosh, Paul, you're slacking like crazy, dude.
I know.
Brian, this is non-podcast related, but Brian not seeing Interstellar for the longest time. There's just some crazy things going on in Bingetown TV. But yes, I very much so enjoyed this episode. Like Paul and Luke were saying, it very much felt like we were back on watching Prestige TV. The scene where Mark opens the elevator and starts running, looking for the wellness area. And like me and Luke talked about in the preview episode, this labyrinth of a building. It was very jarring to see him trying to make all these left, right turns, finding where he's going, where is he going, stopping, starting. And, there's obviously the parallels to when we saw the pilot episode where he's slowly and casually walking to his office, and we're watching as he goes through these white hallways that look like a labyrinth to us, but he knows exactly where he's going because he was working there. But yes, I think that this episode was very, very fun, and I'm ready to go for this season. I have a lot of theories to talk about. Like you were saying, Luke, with Helly, we have some Gemma / Miss Casey talk. I think what we can do is save the big stuff, the big theory talk for the end of the episode. We'll let obviously certain theories organically come about throughout the episode. But for now, what we can do is just go through this episode. We're not going to go scene by scene, but we're just going to go with the flow of the episode. And in the future, we'll obviously break it down into innies versus outies and the storylines like that. But we didn't have any outie storylines in this episode. So let's just start easy enough. What did you guys think when we first are introduced? We got a little bit of your thoughts, Paul. We're first introduced to Mark showing back up into Lumen, and now he has a whole new team. Mr. Milkshake. Mr. Milkshake is now the Miss Cobell's spot. He's the big dog. And now we also have someone taking over for Mr. Milkshake, and she's a little young. What did you guys think?
Yeah, Miss Wong is going to be something that we'll have to talk about at some point in this episode, but I'm so sad because I loved Mark W. I thought he was such a good flavor of comedy to just throw in there. And I don't think I've ever heard Dave, also Binge Down member, laugh that much, like out loud at just dumb little comments. He was just dying at everything Mark W says. But the group was good. I was getting ready for them, just like Paul said, to be a mainstay for at least an episode or two.
Right.
But because they got thrown out, I didn't even memorize the other two's name because I was just like, they're not even going to be important. But maybe they will come back at some level because they were also MDR workers in a different wing, which I don't know how much we knew about the existence of other wings. Maybe that meant at a different branch and they were brought over, or whatever it really means, because we did get some high level good Lumen company information that happens in the break room, which I love that they gave us that slight bit of world building. But in terms of the new team, I'm happy how Mark S treated it, where he was kind of being a little bit like Innie Helly in season 1, where kind of putting on a face, and then at every chance he could get, he's trying to undermine Lumen. And that's like, I say all the time, Innie Helly was my favorite storyline and favorite character of season 1. So I love that stuff when you're trying to really undermine Lumen. And we find out later that there are no quote unquote cameras or microphones anywhere. Maybe there aren't, and the reforms are real, but I absolutely doubt that, because we're talking about end game world domination by Lumen, right? So like, they're not going to just bend over for just because the reforms of the severed, what did they call them? Did they even have a name? The severed four, that the MDR, did they give them a name? I know they said the Macrodat uprising.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just the Macrodat uprising, and then they're just the four.
The new squad, they're gone, so we don't have to spend too much time talking about them. But did you guys have any strong opinions on any of them?
I was just laughing at them. I mean, Mark W., like you were saying, is there any chance you like to use a different name to avoid confusion? Just immediately. And was he Italian, the Italian guy?
Yeah.
He was cracking me up for as little as he spoke, because he was like, we had brooms. Our perpetuity wing had brooms. And his little glass, Mark has his own head in that glass thing. That guy's was carved out of wood because everything was so poor. It was so perfect. And even at the end, Dylan sees it and it's like, what the hell is this? And Mark's like, I don't even feel like explaining. So I'd liked the squad for as little bit as we got. And I was really shocked to see how quickly Mark S was like, no, like, I'm not doing my job. I'm not making friends. I want my team. So he's definitely turned the corner, because beginning of last season, he was goody two shoes, everything Lumen, all four Lumen. And I guess PD really kind of started that. Helly obviously was the bigger catalyst to punch him through. So I was excited to see them leave, honestly. The new crew, that is. Like, they were cool and I enjoyed them, but I was like, get out of here. But real quick, what you said, it was almost interesting to hear how much they knew about the outside wings. I know it's still Lumen and they know all about Lumen, but it was almost like too much information on the outside. So it was interesting, like you said. I really want to see if they come back.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to these newcomers, the more interesting thing was something you were alluding to, Paul and Luke, actually, but the world building that we got in just a little bit of time that they were on our screens. The fact that we know that there's multiple perpetuity wings. And I always had that wonder when I'm watching season one and there's the waffle party, and I'm like, well, Dylan's getting it for his department. What do the other departments do when there's other waffle parties? But we're seeing that there's multiple perpetuity wings, there's multiple wings, there's different versions of the same departments. Very, very interesting stuff. I'm a little confused about why the Italian guy's wing would be so poor. But it
Yeah.
was funny when he's talking about like, what were your founders looking like? Were they, ours are animatronic, like Chuck E. Cheese
Mhm.
freaking people, and then and there's just statues, and then the Italian guys was like, mine was a broom with a plate on the face, like so
Yeah.
there was funny stuff, but there's definitely some world building there too.
That's our favorite stuff here in Bingetown. The core. Is that what I can say? Is that what I say?
Yeah, yeah, we're the
Yeah.
core now, dude.
Me and Paul love the world building.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because like if he's so poor, did they have these computers? Were they doing like whatever they're doing on the computers, or were they like doing it on pen and pad? Talking about the Italian guy,
Yeah,
I
no, it
assume.
has to be still a computer, because I'm gonna have another theory about what they're doing now that we have the little flash of Miss Casey's face at the end of the episode. But you have
Mhm.
to assume they have computers. You can't tell me what their
Yeah,
secret job is pen and paper.
how
Yeah.
can you severance somebody and then not have the technology for a
That's
computer?
why I'm
So
confused about them saying the poor thing. I don't know. Could it be that literally all this is an experiment to see how certain people will react as a severed person, meaning it's not actually that they're poor. They're just deciding that the Italian guy's department was a certain way to see if their severed brain or severed, how they react to that, right?
Yeah.
We talked about the guy with the goats and how he reacts if he has to give away his goats as a severed maybe caretaker or something like that. And everything is a test. And
Yeah.
again,
Provoke
we'll
a
get into that.
response or something.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the first real conversation Milchick has with Mark, and he wants to catch them all up because there's a couple of interesting pieces here. And first thing I'm pointing out, like besides him, of course, bringing up and catching Mark up about what the real world events, like where MDR is now the face of the reform, he says, as an unsevered man, I'll never forget this. I'm still not buying it. I think there's a chance that he's either also like potentially a permanent innie, or he is severed and doesn't know. Something could be there because he says that and it's so like in your face. And I feel like Milchick has to have another layer outside of Lumen that they can probably jump in on and at some point in this season, because he does already seem to be taking up way more screen time than he was getting in season one. And I love Milchick, so I love every second of that. But go ahead, Jimmy.
I hope it's not going to be a problem for any of our listeners, the amount that we're probably going to talk about Westworld, but it would be so interesting to have someone like Milchick, Mr. Milkshake, baby, think that he is not severed, but he is. So he's entirely, it's like in Westworld when a host thinks that they're actually the person that they are, but they're
Mhm.
not. And I don't want to give any spoilers, obviously, if anyone decides they want to watch it, but that's something that could be very interesting for Milchick. He's literally doing his job. He thinks he's specifically a non-severed man, but of course he is severed. The only thing that I was thinking about when it comes to that scenario, Luke, is that he went up into the real world to awaken Dylan from his innie
That's
state.
true.
But again, we know that you can manipulate that any way you want. So they could just have him not really be affected by the elevator for that one time, and he doesn't realize it, and he just leaves and goes. There's a lot of scenarios, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of intricacies to Severance, meaning the actual procedure and how it works, that would make our conversation 5 hours long. But yes, I think that they said that in our face very
For a reason.
blatantly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But the other two things I want to highlight from this scene that I think are worth talking about for a second is the one is hilarious. It's just that they're trying to say that the reason that Miss Cobell was fired was because that she as a person was just obsessed erotically with Mark and wanted to make a throuple. That's just hilarious. But the actual thing I really wanted to bring up was that Milchick says that the rest of MDR didn't want to come back naturally after what happened, but Mark's outie begged to come in, and he's led to believe, or sorry, what I would say is that it's kind of obvious to me as a viewer that it's because he wants to save Miss Casey, aka Gemma, his wife, right? Like that's why Mark would be signing up to go right back in to break her out.
Like, we need to see when Audi Mark comes to in that situation to really see what kind of happened. And we might not
And we
get,
will.
hopefully we get that
No, we
episode.
will.
Yeah,
We
no, we'll get
100%
that. Yeah.
will. Yeah. But
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's not that big of a leap to say that.
It's interesting jumping from Miss Cobell to Milchek because you guys were talking about on the preview episode and going into your theory about why you think she's a permanent innie. She was obsessed with Kier. Like, she was at home praying to Kier by herself. Milchek does not seem like that at all. He's definitely for Lumen. It seems like he's very professional in the way he approaches things and ongoings and just the conversations he has with everybody, but he's not like fully Kier, like all hell Kier and stuff like that. So
Do you buy that Selvig is a permanent indie?
I definitely could. Yeah. And she thinks
Nice.
she's jumping around everywhere, but I mean, the way that she's obsessed with him makes you think that, she is a permanent innie because you don't really see anybody else outside the world talk about Kier. People are weird outside too. Like, when they're at the party, everybody acts so weird, and I don't know what it is. Like, the one guy, Mark goes in, finds, the baby in the
Yeah.
carriage, and the guy comes in, he's like, "I found her first. Like, it was
Yeah.
me. Don't worry." It's
Yeah.
just like, that's not
Well,
That's
normal.
totally just like a societal criticism that the writers are doing and just like making fun of like elites, I guess. I don't know. That's what I was getting from that. But yeah, that was a funny little
yeah,
moment that they gave
that
him.
friend group is just weird in general. That's the same guy that was in the conversations during the dinnerless dinner. And,
Yeah. Which,
there's obviously a
Dinnerless
very
dinner.
weird scenario when it comes to where they are, how much Lumen controls everything about the outside world where they are. We obviously see the newspaper, and it's whatever it's called, Kier News or whatever. That's paraphrasing, but it's all controlled by Lumen.
so do you think there's any truth behind what Milchek was saying that Miss Cobell had an obsession with Mark? Not the thruple wise,
Oh, well,
but
Okay,
there's
then
got to be an
yes.
obsession.
Yes.
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
because she would schedule what was it called? When she
The
would,
wellness.
yes, the wellness checks, and Milchek's like, again, like, why would you want
Well,
that?
that is because he was saying again, because why do you keep wanting to do the confrontation between Gemma / Miss Casey and Mark? Because you're testing if they're going to recognize each other. So he
Yeah.
keeps saying, why do you keep wanting to do that? And that's why he also was questioning why she had Miss Casey be there for 8 hours watching Helly. And it's just very obvious, especially in the rewatch, that she is so obsessed with Mark and everything that he does, innie and outie Mark. She's constantly watching him. And when she is watching him on her computer through the security camera, she hits the off button when anyone comes in. It seems like she doesn't want anyone to know that she's specifically watching Mark. She always, when she's Miss Selvig, even though she could be technically acting, she just seems like, I'm not going to say love like they're joking about, but there's something about her that there's some kind of obsession where she really only cares about Mark. You don't
Yeah.
see her following Helena or Irving or Dylan on the outside. She lives right next door to Mark. She's constantly in his business. And we didn't fully get into this in the preview, Luke, just because we didn't want to go forever. But it is definitely weird. And there's obviously going to be more to that. Whether Miss Casey is specifically connected or not, I'm not sure. But yes, it's weird. And I still buy it.
And
Yeah.
just to go further into that, and you guys were talking about how Miss Cobell, Miss Selvig could be a good person, could turn around and be on, the good guys team. When Mark says, well, it was any Mark, but he was talking to Miss Selvig at the party in the finale, like, oh, I was thinking about leaving my job, and she
Yes.
hugs him. She hugs him and is like, "Do it." And that was
Yeah.
like very confusing because, as far as we knew, she needed Mark to be in Lumen. He was like the keystone. So it's almost like she is rooting for Mark on the outside. So there's so much weird shit going on in their relationship that
Yep.
I don't know where Miss Selvig / Miss Cobell is, but I'm leaning towards she could easily be a good guy.
That I said there's a path for her to be on Team Any.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is. There is.
Yeah. Yeah.
My thought was that she was like a disgruntled. I just got fired. Screw Lumen.
Mm.
You can unsever and be done with it. Reintegrate, however you want to say it. I guess you can't do that, but just not work there anymore. They think you can't do that, quote unquote. But yeah, there's so much to it, and I can see a redemption. But obviously, she sandbags them and busts their ass when she finds out, and she's trying to get back in the good graces of Lumen by doing so. But back to season 2 and what goes on in this episode, besides the fact that she's having, or Milchick is saying that she wants to have a throuple with Indy and Audi Mark, it also seems like she's the fall person for this whole scenario. She is the one that is forcing the evilness. We listened too much to Cobell, and we were too mean to the innies because she wanted it to be like this. Heliar said we were torturing them because Miss Cobell, we followed her lead, etc.
Yeah. All right, let's shift gears over to Miss Wong, because we have that ball game and her introduction, and I just want to put this out there because I think you guys are probably going to disagree with me, but my initial take on Miss Wong is I love the shock factor. I love the implications of being able to sever somebody that's younger and seeing that in play. But I'm just comparing her to Milchick in every scene she's in, and she tries to do that goofiness to seriousness that he does to the best level possible, and it's not clicking as much for me, and it's probably on purpose. Like, you want it to be that jarring difference, but I'm just not vibing with her right now as much as I thought I would after the trailer, because she does pop up in the trailer for a second. What's your guys' take on Miss Wong initially? Like, or yeah, just in general.
Confusion was my first take, and I think, like, Dylan even touched on it. He was like, why the hell is she 8? Like, this is ridiculous. What the hell's going on? Is it confirmed that she's severed, or just she's working on the severed floor?
I
She's
mean, how
working
can
on the
you
severed
confirm
floor.
that ever with anybody?
Yeah, I got you. I just didn't know if, like, she even said it or whatever. So I don't even know. In the back of my mind, I was like, she just might be not severed and just told to do a job and continued on and stuff like that. But in what you were saying, totally agree. Not even close to Milchick, because Milchick was just, you almost wanted to root for him, even though he was like evil and didn't like our guys. You see him make that smile, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, look at this guy, he's back. This dude. So, like, it's hard. Whoever takes over his role isn't going to be nearly as impactful. But what her role is, I don't really know. It's so confusing. I was like, is she a kid of somebody else out there? Because they were bringing in Miss Casey, who was, a wife of somebody else out there. So all this stuff, I have no, like, foundation for a theory, though, because we got so little on her. So I'll save anything else until next episode.
I'll agree with you that I jumped the gun by saying she's severed. She actually probably isn't, right?
Right,
Because
exactly.
Milchick wouldn't have been. Yeah, sorry. I totally just said that out of turn.
So that was what I was going to say, Luke. If we assume Milchick isn't severed, which we can't assume that either 100%, because we're obviously theorizing he's not, we would also assume that she's not severed, Miss Wong. And something that you have to think about, and we already started to theorize and play devil's advocate against it, is that if they have managers in Lumen on the severed floor, you would think that you wouldn't want them to be severed, because you want them to be able to do things like what Milchick did on the outside when Dylan took the card. There's a scenario where you would think that they wouldn't want them to be severed, but there's a couple scenarios here what they could be trying to say to us. The first one is, if she's severed, it's just one of those things where we have Lumen and all the people that believe in Lumen and the Severance and all of that. And we have a parent who believes in Lumen that literally decided to give their kid away to Lumen and have her be severed to be used on the severed floor as a manager. Now, the flip side of that is, even if she's not severed, there's a parent out there, most likely, unless she's adopted or foster or whatever it is, that decided, I am going to sign off on the fact that Miss Wong here is going to be not going to school. She's going to be 9 to 5 or whatever, working as a manager.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a weird scenario. The other thing I was thinking about is maybe everything that they do now, everything they did in season 1, but everything now they're doing in season 2 has some kind of meaning, and it's some meaning, and it's some kind of manipulation. Everything that we're finding out in the break room video and what they're doing about with Dylan, and how they're going to have some maybe family meetings and gatherings for him. Everything has a meaning. Everything has a manipulation. And my thoughts were that maybe they put a kid in as the manager because they want everything now for season 2 to feel more comfortable and not intimidating, right? So if Milchick is the actual manager again, they would be like, I am under guard. I'm in prison right now. This is bad. But you have Miss Wong, even though she is Milchick-esque when she's being very stern and straight, and then she's kind of like saying, let's play this game. She's also a kid where they're not really going to take her as very intimidating, and it wouldn't make them want to be like, I need to get out of here. This is crazy. I'm under guard.
Right. And yeah, I mean, she'll pop up throughout the episode because she's the only one that actually stays of the new squad. So I think we can leave her for now, unless you guys have a pressing theory you want to bring up. But I think we just rip through the next 2 days, which is before the main squad gets back, because I'm so antsy to just talk about Helly, Dylan, and Irving. So I think just in general, like the plan was there. It was a good plan for Mark to write the fake note, blame Mark W. But we knew from season 1 that the elevators have the ability to read any type of notes. He knew he was going to get caught. He wanted him to get caught. And that's exactly what happened. It ends up turning into the funny scene where like Mark is just at this point, like middle finger up to Lumen, like bring my homies back. Like this is just not happening. And he fakes him out, runs and tells the board, like, I need everybody back. And it actually works. But this little plan is, I think, probably the last we'll see of this other second version of macro data refinement. Maybe they'll come back and so at some point in time, but I think that's probably exit stage left for these 3, right?
I would assume so, at least for a while. I would be surprised if we saw them next episode. But my only other question was when Mark W says, like, oh, I'm happy to be on this team because my last team never hit quota.
Yeah.
I wonder, was there a consequence for not hitting quota? Because he didn't say anything. And the finger traps, man. Holy shit. I would die without finger traps.
Yeah.
But I was just curious about that because I wanted him to elaborate. Like, was there an issue? Because they were freaking out last season.
They were.
Where it was like, Helly needs to finish this. What happens? Not even macro data. Cobell and Milchick in their office were freaking out watching her. So want to know why there's so much urgency. And that could be, some theory talk at the end of the episode. And 2, what the consequence is if it is just lack of perks and no waffle party.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear him say they never made quota, especially after what you said, Paul, where it was such a big deal to see if they were going to hit it, meaning our MDR group were going to hit it last season. So I don't think there's anything more to talk about except for theories when we get a little bit closer to the end of the episode. But very, very interesting. I would have been okay with maybe one more episode of seeing Mark W be Mark's actual boss, like the head of MDR. Like I would have been fine with that. That would have been kind of funny.
I do want to just re-highlight my favorite theory that we talked about in the preview episode, which is related to the board. And I'll keep constantly referencing this until it gets disproven. But just super 10,000 feet high view of the theory is that Jay Egan, which is Helly's dad on the outside, the current CEO of Lumen, I'm under the impression that he has a chip in his head that has all of the summation of all the past CEOs, because he references something called the revolving to Helly in the finale of season 1. And he also says that on my day of revolving, like you'll be there. So I think the assumed plan is that Helly is going to take over as the next CEO with all of the previous CEOs being put into her head. And in this case, when Mark went and reached out to the board, I'm thinking Jamie Egan heard it and then he responded to it. And now the next part of this is going to be what the deal with Helly is. But if you guys are ready, let's just start ripping when everybody starts coming back to the floor of the OGs, because I actually want to question first, and you guys tell me what you thought. Why did Mark freak out when he saw the elevator closing and he's like, wait, and then it opens up to the new artwork and then all of MDR comes back? Did I misread why he was freaking out? What was he trying to stop from happening?
So my thoughts were that this is an ongoing theme throughout the episode, especially with Irving when he is going to think about leaving. And to Mark, meaning any Mark, if he gets fired, which he thought he was getting, and he's being put in the elevator, he's like, am I being fired here? Dead. Right?
Gotcha.
Any Mark is now dead. So he's saying, wait, can I stop this? He's thinking that there's a chance that he will never return and he's done.
Okay. That's good enough. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Cool. So let's talk about it. Thoughts on the reunion, especially, and we got to highlight the artwork because Dylan comes out and reads it and says, it says on it, Kier pardons his betrayers. And it looks like it's just a metaphor for MDR getting pardons, the 4 of them kind of being allowed back into Lumen. And that's good enough. But if there's anything deeper, definitely bring it up. But more interested in like the actual little interactions, because these are the second that the season 1 finale ended into right now, 5 months later.
Yeah.
This is happening. Like Bert banging on, or Irvin banging on the door for Bert was cool. Just like how Helly reacted, which I think could potentially be acting,
Ooh,
and that's what I'm keep
yeah.
hinting at. But it was just a cool moment, I thought.
So good.
Something that we should have assumed would happen, just because we knew that when Heliar tried to kill herself, hang herself, she came back into her Audi form as it was happening. So then when she was finally brought back down as Innie Heliar, she was basically going to be right in the middle of that, right?
Yeah.
So as far as we knew from season 1 into season 2, when the overtime contingency was finished, when Milchick actually stopped it, from that moment on, we would assume that that's where it was paused for them.
Yep.
So that's why it was very cool. And Irving with Bert was the most telling, just him banging on the elevator door versus the door for Bert. And I agree. I think we're going to get those scenes. So I would like to see Bert's reaction to opening the door and it be Irving, and now it's Audi Irving being like, "What the hell just happened?"
I love Irving, man. If I was on the preview episode, I might have had him ranked as 4 or 5. I know Jimmy, I think you had him as 5. He's so good. The way he's looking at Bert and he's like, "You're telling me you came all the way from O&D to come down here to give us new handbook tote bags," with like the biggest smile on his face too. It was just so brilliant. And just the way he looks at work, and then you find out that he was in the Navy, so maybe that's where his disciplined mindset comes from, just work, work, work. And then obviously his relationship with Bert. He's so interesting and he's so funny. He's like, Mark, I don't think you should put away the old photos yet until we take the new photos. He's like, another conversation happens. He's like, Mark, I just checked. You're really not supposed to take away. He's just so good. So the way he came rushing back in and being down there, I'm sure immediately he's just faced with disappointment and distraught, being so close to Bert and all of a sudden being back in MDR. And then Dylan was just like, that motherfucker ruined my best belt. Talking about Milchick.
How does he know it's his
like
best belt, dude?
I don't know. It's his only one, probably.
It's Innie's best
like
belt.
that.
Yeah.
Dylan was hilarious this episode when he says later, like, he's like, "Holy fuck," and Milchick's like, "The holiest." So Dylan is comedy, man. He absolutely
he's so good. And he's like, so who was highlighted? Who was the actual hero? Was it all of us? Was it one person specific?
Okay, so we can talk about Helly real quick, because they all
Let's do this whole thing, because this is where everything starts. And it sounds like, just through innuendos and me looking at Jimmy, like we're on the same page about this. Paul, are you under the impression that this is Audi Helly or Innie Helly? And have you thought deeply about it, the possibility of this being Audi Helly?
I've thought about both. So one, just Audi Helly coming in, making up the story, just trying to get this MDR crew back to where they were. But I also was thinking it really could be Innie Helly. And the last thing that Cobell said to her Helly before she went out on stage and did the whole expose was, "We will hold them down there. We will torture them. Like your friends. We will, like, if you do this, they're basically done." So she could remember that. Helly is thinking, if I tell them the truth and figure all this and let them figure all this other stuff out, maybe they really will go through and punish these guys. So I was thinking that it could be Innie Helly and she's lying to protect everybody, but it is very suspicious.
I love that you just said that, because that kind of helps with what I was about to say, which is, it almost feels like the show is telling you that this is Audi Helly. Like, I don't know. Are we just good TV watchers and we're assuming that? Is it a red herring? I'm leaning towards it almost being a red herring for a couple of reasons. And the main thing, or I guess the couple things that I picked out were, well, one, she sounds pretty damn jealous, like genuinely jealous when he starts talking about Miss Casey Gemma. That also could just be an act. That's totally fine. But what the first thing she says when she walks through that elevator is, "Wait, what happened to the security camera?" Or maybe that was as soon as she walks back into the room. Either way, like, she's aware of where the cameras were in the past. And I didn't catch that through my first watch through, but that seems like, did she really go to the length of researching that much to play the Innie Helly to make that type of comment? feels a little too specific. So that also led me to believe it was Innie Helly. And then the other piece being the whole lying about what she was doing. Obviously, she wouldn't want them to know that she is the daughter of the CEO of Lumen, and
Right.
partially the reason that they're all here potentially being tortured. So I like the blackmail angle, especially because we know from the break room video that Lumen's aware that Mark and Helly kissed, and like they play it up. So
Yep.
I'm all in on the idea that like Audi Helly and everybody is like threatening Annie Helly. We'll kill Mark W if you don't go back into MDR and play this up. So there's enough there that it could still go either way. I just need a couple things answered if they keep her as the Audi of like why she knows so much about the inside. Maybe as the CEO's daughter, she's been here a million times, and that's a good enough explanation. So it truly could go either way, and I love that they're
Yep.
doing it because it's a fun conversation online because there's no definitive answer yet. But Jimmy, which side are you leaning towards?
The side that I'm leaning towards is that it's a red herring and it is Innie Helly.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I'm saying that is when it comes to her lying, like you said, Luke, it's very obvious, very surface level that the reason she would lie is because she does not want them to know that her outside world, her outside person, her Audi is the enemy. Something very telling to me was her freak out to Mark when she's like, "You don't owe Audi Mark anything. You know,
Mm-hmm.
their POS is out there. They're not worth you're you, they're them. We're totally different." And she kind of like does a major, it doesn't seem like it was acting on that freak out.
Yes.
I just think it's very like red herring ish where they would just be like wanting you to think
Mm-hmm.
that wouldn't it be convenient to have Heliar actually be Helena the entire time and a spy for Lumen? But I do like the blackmail angle that I wasn't really thinking about, where you could have any Heli be turned back on, however you want to say it, as any Heli beforehand, have them talk to her and be like, listen, okay, last time you talked to Miss Cobell, you heard this, what she said to you, right? You're gonna go down there, you're gonna be Heliar, you're not gonna be Helena, you're gonna be Heliar, but you're gonna be our spy, you're gonna undermine them, you're blah 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 blah, or we're gonna make your life a living hell. We're gonna
Mm-hmm.
torture you guys, we're gonna do whatever. You love Mark, he's gonna be our first victim. Something like that. I could
Yep.
see that being my most likely scenario.
Yep. That's exactly
Yeah.
where my head's at.
It's interesting too because season 1, she's like, my number one goal is to get out of this place, and I want Audi Helly to be dying and know that it was by my hands, any Helly.
Yeah.
And then you get the conversation
Badass.
with Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely badass. And then you get the conversation with Mark this time, and they all got offered to leave, and none of them wanted to leave.
Except
Understandable
Irving.
that except Irving. And it's understandable, they became friends, they became close. If they leave, they die technically. So maybe after becoming so close, Helly really was like, okay, I don't want to leave, I want to stay here. But at the same time, she could be blackmailed into staying there. She said she's there to help Mark figure everything out. She could just be a seed and also blackmail, like you're saying. If you don't go down there, we're gonna just destroy everyone. So I'm all in on the fact that it is Innie Helly, but there is blackmail or outside forces telling her, go back down there, do this, do that.
Yeah. So when it comes to that scenario, Paul, any Helly would never want to go back outside again unless there's some kind of reintegration because she knows that her Audi is the worst person in the world in her mind, right? So
Yeah.
she's essentially in season 1 saying, I want to get out of here. I want to quit. I'm done. I want to go back to the Audi world. If she does that now, she's fully aware of the fact that Helena is now who she is.
That's
So
true.
that would be majorly why she wouldn't want to leave too. But I agree. I think that blackmail thing is a big scenario that we'll continue to talk about through the season. Now, the other thing that I think is really interesting and probably more interesting to talk about is how they got certain people, meaning Dylan, Irving, to come back in, right?
Yes,
We
totally.
know Mark is an easy slam dunk, right? If he knows that Gemma's down there, he's going to want to go back. Immediately, he wants to go back and he wants to get Miss Casey out of there and he wants to get his wife. Easy. Helena will do whatever she thinks is best for Lumen. So if Helena thinks that it's best to bring Heliar back and bring the group back together, or if her dad tells her it's what's best, she will do that. But now we have Irving. He's kind of okay too, because we know that he's trying to almost be a spy for
Mhm.
himself and trying to almost reintegrate himself using other means to be a spy down in the severed floor. Now, Dylan, we haven't gotten really anything just because Dylan wasn't woken up. Dylan was the one who was actually going through with the overtime contingency, pressing the buttons and pulling the levers. But Dylan had to be talked into sending his guy back in, sending his Innie Dylan back in after everything came out. We'll obviously get that, but it would be interesting to see. I kind of talked myself out of all three of the other ones. Now, Dylan, I would just have to see what they said to him to be like, just put him back in, man. We need him.
Yeah.
You know,
Also
join
could be
back
the
in.
blackmail route because they know about his families, but that seems a lot.
I
But
was I was thinking the same thing, Jimmy. Like, how after 5 months did they either convince them to come back or told them to come back? And my two theories were: one, they're literally holding the bodies of Dylan and Irving down there in Severance, and they were waiting until they needed the innies, and then they were like, all right, we can, throw them in. But then that doesn't make sense because they have all these outside lives. Or they just told the Audis, hey, your innie did something, you're suspended for until we need you to come back to play, or maybe like you're fired or something like that. And the Audis, see, then that's confusing too, just because the Audis know about this whole
everything
big
came out.
expose
Yeah,
that
no,
came
everything
out,
came out.
or they just did Lumen make that up to just make the innies happy of Macrodata and Refinement? They made this whole movie just for these four people, and the rest of the world doesn't really know about it. That was another theory I
Well,
have. They're just saying all these things to make the core four
so
group happy.
right. So you're saying you think that the Heliar end of season one scenario was somehow hushed up, covered up,
Yeah.
and it didn't get out into the real world. And they made that scenario of them being heroes and the newspaper and all that stuff just to make the innies feel accomplished. That's actually not a bad idea, Paul,
I
because,
like it.
yeah, because we honestly know there's so much about season one of Lumen where it's like, where are they located? What's going on? The newspaper is obviously Kier News. Like everything just seems to be controlled by Lumen. We don't know obviously the innies from MDR, the new ones were saying, where do you think we are? Is it Wyoming? We were guessing Wyoming. Like we don't know anything about the outside world. It could be that Lumen has so much control in the area that they are specifically in that they hushed everything up. We know too that the speech that she was giving was to politicians, but it was also to like higher ups in Lumen and donors and all of that kind of stuff. And if they're already kind of leaning Lumen, we know that she was having to change some minds. Let's go out there and change some minds, they say. It could be that it was hushed up and it was contained.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'd have to go back and watch that claymation video that they showed the four after they came together, because did they show Helly's any on stage, like doing the whole expose? Because she gave the rest of the crew like a fake story about a fake gardener, like what she came to outside. And if in the claymation video, if they showed something different, that would just obviously not
No,
make
I don't.
sense.
I don't think they did, unless I
No,
missed
yeah.
it, because that would have been, even if that didn't get hushed up. I don't think they would have put that specific piece in there.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I can't
But
remember off the top of my head.
no, it was not in there. But I do want to talk about a few things. The first thing is that let's burn this mother effer to the ground, right? Certain things were said in that video that we thought, or at least I thought, it was supposed to be between the four of them. We know that there's cameras, we know that there's people listening in, but if you're telling me that they can listen and have seen every single thing from season one, then how did any of the plan ever happen?
Yeah.
So I was
It
a
could
little
have been
confused.
a post after they realized this happened. They went back and checked all the security, found everything. Because I don't know if they have enough, if they're literally monitoring them at every second,
Yeah.
everything they
Okay.
say and do. Because otherwise, wouldn't they have caught Mark writing that note on his, that he slipped into Mark W's jacket right there? Because if they're watching you at every second, they must have found the note, went back and looked at security cam, saw that Mark did it, confirmed it through the handwriting, like things like that. I think that's
Yeah.
probably how it works.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. But let's talk about the video because a couple things, like we're in the break room probably at this point, right? Like we can keep
Yep.
going with this conversation. Just probably doesn't even need conversation, but really cool facts about Lumen was Kier started in 1870. That's just cool. We might have already known that year because of the wing, but also they confirmed that Lumen operates in 206 countries, which makes sense with the Italian guy. There's probably an Italian branch. That's why it's everything so different. That's also really cool, and that definitely brings me back to Westworld style of world domination because they are everywhere. And then they coined the term macrodat uprising. But yeah, and then at the end of this, after they get all this information, Milchek gives them that decision that we've been talking about. Are they going to stay? Are they going to leave? And then they info share about what they actually saw.
Yeah, and I think it's all a manipulation, every single thing about it, right? I'm so
Mhm.
sorry. We held you like prisoners. We're not going to have the door locked anymore. We're going to give you extra perks where you're going to have hall passes and pineapple dunking and bobbing pineapples, whatever. But those
Ouch.
perks are so hilariously weird. But basically, everything about it's a manipulation. Like, I don't believe for 1 second that if they actually said, I want to leave, they would have let them just leave, right? I think that it's just to let them think that they have some sort of control.
Exactly.
If Irving would have decided at the end of that episode to leave, he would have shown back up again at some point.
Yeah.
In season 1, we saw that Milchek purposefully sent a photo to MDR's printer, trying to trick them into thinking they found more information. Really, that it was just planted to them. So if he's done that once in season 1, he's manipulating them like reverse psychology type. This could 100% be that, because what you're saying. How do you get them to stop making trouble? Give them more freedoms and make them think they're special, and maybe they're like, all right, maybe we shouldn't be causing trouble because we have it a little bit better now, and stuff like that. So in my head, this is all Milchek just being a genius and playing all of them.
How do you even get a pineapple like that? That's
I
not
guess you have to
possible.
go by the top of it with the.
Oh, that would hurt too.
That's what
Yeah,
I'm
right.
saying. It just looks painful, and they're like
Yeah.
I don't
fucking
know why you
shoving
would
it.
bob for pineapples. It's such a weird thing. But back to really quick your idea, Paul, about hushing everything up. Something that I'm still trying to like wrap my head around is the fact that if Heliar actually blew the whistle big time, if it actually got out there, if Mark was able to talk to his sister, who then talked to Rickon, who then actually talked to New York reporters and all of that. If that wasn't hushed up, how is it that they can still be Lumen and having a severed floor and still doing Severance like it is? I understand that they're kind of quote unquote all powerful and trillion gajillionaires, and that has something to say. You could definitely do what you want in certain scenarios for that, but you would think that 5 months later, it would be a problem if the whistle was blown that badly, where we're being tortured down there and all that kind of stuff.
It's going to come out in the flashback episodes.
Yeah, very true.
I think those episodes are going to be the glue of this whole show, and like specifically what you were talking about earlier, Jimmy, like Dylan's reasoning for coming back. I'm putting a lot of weight on them being able to successfully and like make it make sense in how they bring everybody back. I even brought that up on our preview episode because if they fail at that, the whole show falls apart in my head. And I'm full confidence that they have a plan figured out because we even saw in the trailer Milchek going and talking to some of them like, hey, like come back kind of thing. I forget who he was talking to, but we're going to get all that. So like we can speculate all we want, but it's going to be answered. And that's going to be like the main piece that gets us we'll probably get that all revealed in the first half of the season. That's going to be like the main glue piece that makes everything work together. But I don't know how they would keep that hushed down if this is like a Fortune 500 company, one of the biggest things that's probably happening in the world business wise. It would get out and people would freak, but who knows what the real world is in this timeline.
Yes, exactly. There's things to talk about with like the type of car that they're riding in when they're in the newspaper, when it says that they're in the 4 who are being celebrated as whistleblowers now. And obviously they blacked out certain part of the newspaper and all of that kind of stuff. And our Discord, which we haven't talked about this episode yet, bingetowntv.com/Discord. Jump on there for any Severance talk, any Silo talk, any Apple TV talk, any TV talk. But there's some people, some of our good friends on Discord throwing some screenshots of the newspaper and talking about specific things that they talked about in the articles of the newspaper. And I freeze framed a little bit, and we don't have to get too into it, but there's still some major mystery about everything on the inside and everything on the outside too. It's not like we know the outside. And Irving wasn't saying it in this way. He didn't mean it in this way, but he was like, this outside world is not our world. It's not the world we live in.
And let's just keep talking about Irvin, because like after they info share, he doesn't actually say his piece, but they all break. That was like a moment where I thought there was a chance he was going to walk out, because Dylan can almost convinces him by being like his friend and like telling him the truth and saying that he wants him there and he's like attached to him and all those things. And then he goes in for the hug. I think he's trying to talk under any chance of there being a microphone or anything. And then he gives him the information. I really thought Irving was going to try and walk out and we were going to see what happens, but it convinced him. And at the end, he does come back. But that was a cool moment, because Dylan doesn't really show his emotional side often. And when you have those type of characters that are like the goofy, like hard asses, it's great when you get those little bit of moments where he's like, I'll be sad if you leave. Like, you make me good here. And Dylan, as you know from the preview episode, is top 5 character for me and continues to be. So,
yeah, that was amazing. He was like, Irving smiled. It was like, I'm your favorite perk or something like that.
Yeah.
Because we all know Dylan loves the perks. Oh my God. It was so good. I love their relationship because they almost seemed like they didn't hate each other, but they always just barked at each other in season 1. And now that we see how much they mean to each other, it's so good. There's a lot going on with Irving too.
Yeah.
What do you think well, I mean, we have to, otherwise it's just a big, hole, but do you think we're going to get that black ooze coming back in? And do you have any theories behind it?
Yeah, let's talk about this, because I alluded to this in the preview episode. But first, let's talk about Irving in general, his motivations for wanting to leave, or his motivations for how he feels currently in the severed floor as an innie. When we go to the break room, Mark gives his exact recollection of what happened. Dylan doesn't have any innie or outie recollection because he wasn't out there. Helly totally lies, and we already discussed that. Irving walked right out, didn't want to talk about it, right? And you can assume that obviously he's upset because he saw Bert with another person, and he loves Bert and he wishes that he could have been with Bert. But you also have to assume that an outie is going to have another relationship, right? My thoughts too are that he just feels ashamed that immediately he woke up and went to Bert. It's like how you were saying he is inside as an innie, where he's very like get the job done, very detail oriented, very strict. He may feel like that he went for the love side of things instead of the get things done side of things.
Yeah,
definitely.
Right. And obviously it's not that big of a problem that he did that, because he wakes up in an apartment and who does he think he can go talk to? He found Bert and was going to go talk to Bert. Now, Bert may not be the best person to talk to, just because he could have been like another Helena who's like, hey, I'm a freaking person who decided to sever myself. I don't give a shit what you have to say about what the innies are doing. But I think that he felt like he let them down because he went to Bert instead of accomplishing the mission. And
exactly.
Now, with this black goo, we talked about this in the preview episode. We were saying, is it him just doing it over and over and over, blasting the music, not sleeping, and trying to bleed the outie world into the innie world? That's obviously something I truly believe, because
that's where my head's
Irving, Irving definitely seems like someone who's trying to infiltrate Lumen and trying to go against Lumen. Now, something that I also quickly alluded to that I just couldn't get into big time in the preview episode is, what is he drawing? Well, or painting. Well, we kind of know what he's painting. He's painting the room, the hallway that leads to the elevator that leads to the testing floor. And what we do know is that when Milchek brings Miss Casey to that hallway and then puts her in the elevator, that light pointing down only goes on and can only be seen by the person that sends the other person there.
Yep. Thought about that.
So my thoughts are that Irving did work for Lumen as an unsevered person, aka someone like Milchek or Miss Wong, something along those lines. And now he hates what he was doing. Basically think of a scenario where we have an unsevered Milchek, someone that we assume that he wasn't severed, and he does his job, and then throughout doing his job, he realizes, wow, we're POSs. I can't believe we're doing this to innies. That's my
But
thought on her.
let me
Yeah, go
ask
ahead.
you then, how can this fit in the theory that if Irving was gonna just betray Lumen and just start being a spy, why would he not be in a better position to continue being the Milchek role and just in his head thinking I'm gonna undermine everything rather than saying, all right, let me go through the severed procedure and then have to think of a crazy way to re-infiltrate when I already have this golden seat and this golden view of everything. So I do like that there are probably pieces of that are correct, but I think there
Yep.
needs to be something else that what would be the catalyst that makes him want to actually sever himself? Because that seems like such a just natural disadvantage.
Yeah, that's a perfect devil's advocate to that. And I'm not fully in on the fact that he was a Milchek. The only thing that I seem to think in
Milchek.
my head that I can confirm is that he has seen that hallway and he was the person that saw someone go down and saw the elevator hit the button and get hit, the light pointing down, shine, and then the elevator goes. So, and I mean, we just know that the testing floor, which we'll get into pretty soon when we get into the end of the episode, who's going to see that hallway except for someone sending someone down the testing floor?
No, that's the
Yeah.
biggest piece of evidence like in support, and I think that almost trumps what I'm saying because there is a way to talk your way through of why he would have severed himself. So, just another thing that to be on the lookout for this season.
Yeah. And then quickly, if you want to talk about scenarios, we could say, all right, very similar to Cobell with Mark and Gemma. He is Milchek. He decides that he wants to quit, or he even offers himself up to get severed for whatever reason, and they accept it because they want to see if this severed version of Irving would remember that he used to be Mr. Milkshake, right?
Right.
Mm.
Okay, that could also work. Definitely, just
Just
another
more
case study.
testing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
it's not like he chose to be severed. It's almost like he was forced into it. Going off what you're saying, Jimmy, if he was that Milchek role, wanted to quit, they were like, well, you can't, we're going to force you to sever. Otherwise we're going to ruin your life or whatever. So he was like, all right, fine. And that's why he has this chest on the outside that has all this information, has all the employee's name, has all this like secret information. Um, and you guys kind of talked about it. Is he trying to get his outie self to come to when he's in Severance, and that's why he's doing everything, trying to bleed it over,
Yep.
Yeah.
or vice versa? Like, is he trying? I don't know.
To keep this pod short, we'll save this for another episode when it gets brought up more, but there's just a huge talk about what the end goal is for reintegration, quote unquote, for the innies and the outies. Say you reintegrate Helly and Helena. What did it's you don't who's who? Like you have Helena who will now remember like the best case scenario I would say is that for the innies is that when you reintegrate, the innie remembers everything that the outie remembers for their lifetime, and the outie remembers everything that happened within the innie's lifetime. So are you now Helena as the heir to the throne and you just remember everything Helly did, but you're still going to be Helena? Or is it like there's going to be two fighting personalities happening at once? Like it's a little bit easier when it's someone like Mark because you're just like, hey, I'm Mark. I'm kind of a similar person in both worlds. But someone like Helena versus Helly, it's two totally different people. I don't see how reintegration works. Like Petey just like, oh, I'm myself and I just remember what happened on the floor. Well, if Helena does that, she would just be like, yeah, I remember the floor sucks, but I'm still Helena.
I don't know how much of a priority reintegration is for the from the top level. Like it might
No,
have
no, I'm
been
saying for the innies goal to
right,
like
but
that
I'm
has to be
I'm
their goal, right?
uh it's either yeah, I guess I'd never really thought about that because it's either to die or
Mhm.
reintegration and you are the main personality, which is hoping for a lot, I would think. Because
Right.
from Lumen's perspective, the only time we saw people really caring about reintegration was Cobell, I think.
And yeah, and everyone else saying that doesn't exist, that's
Yeah.
not going to happen, and you're
Yeah,
not going to
okay.
let it happen. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know what the innie's goal is. Is it to die? Is it to be the main mindset where you take over the body and you are now the full person? That's an interesting question. Never really thought
Yeah.
about that angle. Yeah. I think we're pretty much at the end here. I do want to just bring up, like, we talked about the family visitation wing. If you guys have any thoughts, throw that out there. But more importantly, and I think you, Jimmy, you might have a theory here. When we see Dylan walk out, we get to see that Milchek's role, which is now Miss Wong, has a similar type of weird computer game job that she's actually doing something. I didn't expect that, to be honest. So
Right.
that's probably going to be its own conversation. And then besides that, we do see MDR get back together, go to work, and then we see that Mark doing the normal MDR job. I don't know if it was like just like a flash of
It's
like
not something he sees.
it's not
Yeah.
something
I
he
think it's
sees of where you
right.
see Miss Casey for like 1 second. The percentage bar on that screen matches what Mark was doing. So there's obviously a
Yep.
natural connection there. So those are like the last two things involving like what the jobs are, which I didn't expect them to give us in this episode because they threw that
Yes.
both
Yes.
at us in the last 2 minutes of this episode. But that pretty much takes us out. So Jimmy, I'll pass it back to you because it sounded like you implied that you had a theory related to that.
Yeah, so we can talk about Miss Wong after because I actually don't have a theory about the game she's playing or the work she's doing specifically. You would have to assume that Melchick was doing the same type of game when that was his
Yeah,
position. So I
definitely.
don't know specifically what they're doing, but let's get into the flash to Miss Casey. Like you were alluding to, Luke, when you look at the screen, it's the screen that Mark is working on, and then it flashes and it's Gemma slash Miss Casey. It shows her vitals, but then it still shows, like you said, the percentage. The bottom looks the same of what Mark's doing. It basically looks like the same screen, except it's just like Miss Casey's file.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the big theory or the big thought for the entire season one was what is macro data refinement doing? What are they actually refining? What, is it taking over the sea because the world outside is not habitable anymore? Is it taking the bad words out of movies or whatever the hell they were saying?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it a situation where, let's get back into Westworld a little bit, okay? So we have the show Westworld and we have hosts and they're quote unquote robots. And throughout the series, the big thing is that the big dogs, aka Lumen, let's just say, are using these robots to control this world, meaning like Westworld, but they're using it as a playground, an amusement park, but they obviously have other uses for them. Basically, robots that do what they say. And then throughout the series, they're regaining sentience, and that's the problem for the Lumen people, right? For the people that are Lumen. Now, Miss Casey, she's going to the testing floor. Okay. One of our big theories for the prior season during our season 2 preview was that Miss Casey either died and she is a dead body that is now being brought back to life as an innie, or she was on the brink of death. They brought her back to life. They faked her death and they're putting her on ice and they're
Mm-hmm.
only waking her up for her innie duties. So, Luke, Paul, what is the file called that she's working on or that Mark is working on? Cold Harbor, right? Is Miss Casey currently in the testing area on ice, turned off, if you want to say it that way? And what they're doing in macro data refinement is they're playing with emotions of her chip, right? So we know that when they're doing their job, they're looking around, they're looking for feelings, right? Oh, this is a scary number. This is a happy number.
Mm-hmm.
My thoughts are what if the chip in the head of a human, the end goal for Lumen is to remove the emotions and the humanity from a person so that they are almost like what Westworld starts
Ah,
as, where they're
okay.
actually robots. What would be a perfect, and this is really sad and awful to say, but a perfect end goal for the higher ups of Lumen? When you get severed, you are their robot. They're the robot that they control for whatever it is. Luke, we talked about soldiers. We talked about midwives. We talked about a million things. They want to be able to control you. Now, Miss Casey, what did she say? She said, my favorite thing out of all the hours, not the many hours, the hours that I was alive, was those 8 hours that I spent with you guys, you and Helly and everybody else. And immediately when she told that to Mark, Miss Cobell went to Milchek and was like, send her back to testing now, right? Because
Mhm.
she was showing some kind of non-robotic emotion. And then what
Yeah.
happened when they were sending her back down to testing? She started to cry, and Milchek said, on you go, just like he said to Cobell, which was hilarious after they fired her. But my thoughts are that macro data refinement is trying to remove the humanity and the emotions from the people that they're controlling with the chip in their head in the testing area. So the fight here is that it's not actually going to work always right away, right?
Mm.
You have to do it over and over and over and over and over again. Humanity will always win, kind of the opposite again of Westworld. It's like in Westworld, we have these hosts and you have the tablet and you can move their intelligence, their emotions. You can move everything up and down. And obviously, when Maeve or somebody takes over in Westworld, she's like, I'm going to be intelligent as shit. I'm going to be a badass, like all that kind of stuff. What
Mhm.
if Lumen hasn't gotten there yet? And that's what they're trying to do. So they want Miss Casey to fully be a robot. But when she shows emotion, cut her, bring her back to testing. We're done. That's what we're testing her on. And she failed. Where's the next reiteration of Miss Casey?
And let me throw just something I just thought of on the fly to add to this theory would be that what if hypothetically, like they're connecting people to a machine down in the testing facility, and like things are happening when you're stripping this emotion out to their brain. And what if like there's certain periods of time that they can only be in the testing facility for so long. So if you don't hit the quota as MDR, they die. So like that's why
Okay.
it's so
That's good.
important to get that 100%, and why in season 1 when Cobell and Milchek are sitting at the desk like freaking out, like everybody's like nervous, like are we going to hit the quota? Maybe that was the process of like the difference between keeping the body alive and rechecking their new emotional state versus them dying and it being a wasted month. Like that could be a
Yeah.
piece of it.
Yeah. And for every time you fail and you don't hit quota, so our boy Mark W's team stinks, they're having a dead body or dead
Yes.
bodies, right? So
Mhm.
it
Yes.
could
Yes.
be
Yes.
Mark, Irving, Helly, Dylan are each working on every file is a different person. And
Hmm.
Mark is currently working on Miss Casey. So every single time you don't hit quota, someone is being wasted for
I love
again,
that
for lack
theory.
of better term.
I
So
like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see.
Can I run mine by you real quick?
Yeah, do
Mine's
it.
big. It's along the same lines of yours about organizing like a brain and emotions, but just trying to put everything together. Going back to the goats, what are the points of the goats? I kind of was stretching a little bit, but I was like, all right, what if that was sheep? What do you think of when you sheep? You think of clones, right? You think of them cloning a
I
sheep.
like that.
Maybe they're trying to do it with goats. And once they do that with goats, then they can do it with bodies. And what's the thing? Like, so going to O&D, they had a bunch of 3D printers, right? What if they have a real big 3D printer and they 3D print bodies, basically clones of people? So you can grow a body almost, you can print a body, but you can't give it the memories or thoughts. And that's what MDR would be doing. They have these clones. And Luke, this can go into your theory about the board and immortality, kind of, and altered carbon style.
Hmm.
They
Yep,
can
yep.
they can grow the bodies of the board members, and then they have macro data organizing their brain, right? They can be putting these thoughts, emotions, and feelings into this clone's brain. And in that sense, it could kind of do what you're saying. Yeah, these board members might be all in one chip right now, but if we can get these clones, we can get them to organize their consciousness into these clones, then it's almost like immortality.
Hell yeah.
S-
Dude,
I like that,
sign me
Paul.
up. Sign me up
Yeah.
for both of those theories, dude. They're great.
yeah,
I have seen some theories that Gemma slash Miss Casey is a clone.
that I was gonna,
And
yeah, lean
yeah.
into that real quick because she could be dead, and then they could have made the clone organize the body, and that's why Miss Cobell is so obsessed with watching to see if there is any, real world connection.
Oh
Seeing, oh,
man.
like you remember
I
this?
like that. So really what she's testing, and Luke, this kind of goes back to your theory about Miss Cobell's Audi not being alive, and maybe Miss Cobell herself as a clone or something like that,
Hmm.
because Miss Cobell's end game in that case would be just like the end game of all of the founders, it would be, we need this testing to be successful because I want to have a full body again. I want to feel all the emotions I'm supposed to feel. I want to feel all the memories. I want everything because, like I was saying in the preview episode, it always seems like eternal life or something like that is the end goal for these egomaniacs. And Paul, I really like that theory that they have the clones, they have the ability to make the bodies, but they can't give it the emotions of a human, or, maybe the chip can give you the memories, but not any feelings. Maybe you're just like not feeling any feelings and you're just a robot and you remember things, but that's it. So I don't know, man. I like that. I like both of the theories. I don't know which one I like better because honestly, you kind of just blew my mind there. So
I feel like that's a good way to sign out here. Do we have any final thoughts? Because I know we're going a little bit long, but naturally happens with the first episodes of new seasons.
I just want to see a finger trap, man. I want to see Dylan.
I want to see bobbing for pineapples, bro.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so much more we could be talking about. But I think for everyone listening, we hope an hour and a half, an hour 15 isn't too long for you guys. This will be broken down over and over again as this season goes on. We're gonna have so much to talk about. But if you like what you heard, guys, check us out at the Core Podcast or BingetownTV.com. But the most important thing right now is we have converted to the Core Podcast. We are an Apple TV podcast. So we have Dark Matter on the feed. We have Silo on the feed. We're going to put Masters of the Air, our past coverage of that, on the feed. We have so much coming, and obviously we're covering Severance right now. We had an absolute blast covering Silo. The finale just aired. We have that episode out. So if you guys like Silo, check out that past coverage if you haven't checked it out yet. Otherwise, guys, we will be back next week. And we're here, man. 3 years later, we're here. Once again, we are the Core Podcast, and thank you guys so much for listening.